Listen to me, dear. Come close. Let me tell you about the threads that bind us, not just the ones we weave with our hands, but the ones that tie our hearts together, and how sometimes those very threads can become the rope that either saves us or sets us free. My name is Eleanor May, and I am 72 years old. For most of my life, I believed that love was something you gave freely, without condition, without expectation of return. I believed that being a good woman meant being quiet, accommodating, invisible when necessary. I believed that my worth was measured by how little space I took up in this world. I was wrong about so many things, but let me start at the beginning. When my world was still whole, when the morning light still felt like a blessing instead of a burden I had to carry alone. The house on Maple Street had been our sanctuary for 43 years. Harold and I bought it when it was nothing more than good bones and peeling paint. Back when we were young and foolish enough to believe that love could fix anything. Even a house that leaked when it rained and creaked like an old ship in the wind. Room by room, we breathed life into those walls. Harold would sand the floors on Saturday mornings while I hung new curtains, both of us humming different songs that somehow harmonized in the space between us. The kitchen window looked out onto the garden where I grew tomatoes and roses with equal devotion, and where Harold built a swing that would later hold our son, Michael, and decades after that, our granddaughter, Lily. Every stitch of fabric in that house told a story. The quilt on our bed, pieced together from scraps of Michael's childhood clothes. The throw pillows on the couch, sewn from the same blue cotton as the dress I wore to our 20th anniversary. The curtains in the living room, made from fabric Harold surprised me with after I admired it in the window of Morrison's downtown. Fabric so soft it felt like touching a cloud. I was a seamstress by trade, but more than that, I was a keeper of stories. Every hem I turned, every seam I pressed, every button I sewed carried the weight of someone's life. Wedding dresses that would hold decades of anniversaries. Children's clothes that would be outgrown but never forgotten. Mourning dresses that would comfort the grieving through their darkest hours. Harold used to say, I had magic in my fingers, that I could make beauty from the plainest cloth. But it wasn't magic, it was love. It was the understanding that every thread matters, that every stitch is a small act of faith in the future. When Harold died 3 years ago, I thought that future had died with him. I found him in the garden, on a Tuesday morning in October, lying peacefully among the roses as if he had simply decided to rest. The doctor said it was his heart, that it had been weak for years without us knowing, but I knew better. Harold's heart wasn't weak. It was too full of love for this life, for me, for the family we had built together. Simply couldn't hold any more. The funeral was everything Harold would have hated. Too formal, too somber, too much fuss. But our son Michael insisted on having it at the big church downtown with flowers that cost more than Harold spent on groceries in a month. Michael's wife, Jade, chose the flowers. White lilies, stark and cold, nothing like the wild roses Harold loved. We want Dad to have a proper send-off, Michael said, straightening his expensive tie. Something dignified. I wanted to tell him that dignity wasn't found in the cost of flowers or the size of the church. Dignity was in the way his father had lived, quietly, kindly, with calloused hands and a heart that made room for everyone. But I said nothing. I had learned long ago that there are times when silence is the only gift you can give. After the funeral, after the last casserole dish was returned and the sympathy cards stopped coming, I settled into a new rhythm. I would wake before sunrise, make coffee for 2 out of habit, then pour the extra cup down the sink. I would sit at my sewing machine by the window, letting the morning light guide my hands as I worked on projects that didn't need to be finished. Quilts for babies not yet born. Curtains for rooms that didn't exist. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full of Harold's presence, of memories that lived in every corner of the house. I could still hear his laughter echoing from the kitchen, still smell the soap he used lingering in the bathroom, still feel the warmth of his body in the bed we had shared for so many years. It was in this gentle, grief-touched peace that Lily came to me like a small miracle. My granddaughter was 6 years old then. With Harold's eyes and my stubborn chin, she had been coming to stay with us every weekend since she was a baby. But after Harold's death, those visits became something more precious. They became my lifeline. Grandma Ellie, she would say, climbing onto my lap as I sewed, "Tell me about the princess dress." The princess dress was a creation of pure imagination, a gown I had described to her in story after story. It was made of silk, the color of moonlight, with sleeves that caught the wind and a skirt that sparkled like stars. In my stories, it was worn by a princess who lived in a castle made of clouds, who could fly whenever she felt sad, and who always found her way home. Well, I would begin setting aside my work to give her my full attention. This princess was very special, because she knew that the most beautiful things in the world aren't the ones you can touch. ... double quotes. I would weave these stories as carefully as I wove fabric, watching Lily's eyes grow wide with wonder. And in those moments, with her small body warm against mine and her complete trust in my words, I felt something I had thought was lost forever. Purpose. Lily would help me with simple sewing projects, her tiny fingers learning to guide fabric through the machine while I held her steady. She would pick out buttons from my collection, choosing them with the seriousness of a judge selecting jewels. She would dance around the sewing room in half-finished dresses, making up songs about Sue. Alum. And we all know I've been exploring that path. She would pick out buttons. Make it Sue with Sue's make out buttons. From my collection, Suesing them with Sue's. While I was Suesing Sue's Miss Quow, we would billis if we Sue's wide Sue's win Sue's. We would win we Sue's wise Sue's. Why we Sue's why Sue's why Sue's why Sue's why Sue's why Sue's we sis with Sue's why collects we so I to see we to me I do with you and with see to you secure with you to you see you with you could tell you do it tick you with I cat tick you with kick tick with you I with we were see tick can get I didn't second with it I flying in magic and grandmothers who lived in houses made of love. I want to be just like you when I grow up. Grandma Ellie, she told me one afternoon, her small face serious as she watched me pin a hem. I want to make beautiful things and tell stories and have a house full of magic. I had to turn away so she wouldn't see the tears in my eyes. You already are magical, sweet girl, I whispered. You don't need to be like anyone else. On school days, I would drive to pick her up, arriving early so I could watch her through the chain-link fence as she played with her friends. She would spot me and wave, her face lighting up like sunrise, and I would wave back, my heart so full. It almost hurt. Grandma Ellie. She would call, running to me with her backpack bouncing and her hair escaping from whatever style Jade had wrestled it into that morning. Guess what we learned today? And I would listen, really listen, as she told me about fractions and friends and the way the cafeteria smelled like mystery meat and disinfectant. I would nod and ask questions and marvel at the way her mind worked, quick and curious and so beautifully alive. Those drives home were sacred time. Just the two of us in Harold's old car, windows down, singing along to the radio or making up nonsense songs about the people we passed on the street. Lily would tell me about her day, about the boy who pulled her hair and the teacher who let her feed the class hamster. I would tell her about my day, about the dress I was working on or the bird I saw in the garden or the way the afternoon light made the dust motes dance like tiny fairies. You know what, Grandma Ellie? She said one day as we sat in the driveway, reluctant to end our time together. I think you're the most beautiful person in the whole world. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror, gray hair escaping from its careful bun, lines mapping every year of my life across my face, hands spotted with age and pricked with countless needle marks. Beautiful was not a word I would have used. Beauty isn't about how you look, sweet girl, I told her, turning to face her completely. It's about how you make people feel. And you, my darling, make everyone around you feel like they're the most important person in the world. She considered this with the gravity of someone much older. Then you're beautiful too, Grandma Ellie, because you make me feel like I'm the most special girl who ever lived. This was my life. Simple, quiet, full of small moments that felt like miracles. I thought it would continue this way, that Lily would grow up visiting me every weekend, that I would teach her everything I knew about sewing and storytelling, and the art of finding magic in ordinary things. I should have known it couldn't last. The changes began slowly. So gradually that I almost didn't notice them at first. Michael started coming with Lily to pick up things from the house, photo albums, pieces of furniture, items that had belonged to Harold. Just getting organized, he would say, but there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite read. Jade began calling more often, her voice bright and artificially cheerful. Eleanor, how are you managing? That big house must be so much work for you now. I would assure her that I was fine, that I had been taking care of this house for decades and knew every creaky floorboard and temperamental faucet. But she would persist, her questions feeling less like concern and more like ... inventory. Have you thought about downsizing? There are some lovely senior communities nearby. It's places where you wouldn't have to worry about maintenance or cooking. Or ... I'm quite capable of taking care of myself. I would say, perhaps more sharply than necessary, this is my home. Of course it is, she would reply. But there was something in her tone that suggested she didn't quite believe it. The first real sign of trouble came on a Saturday morning in February. I was in my sewing room, working on a Valentine's Day dress for Lily pink cotton with white lace trim and tiny pearl buttons when I heard a car in the driveway. I looked out the window expecting to see Harold's old sedan. But instead, there was a shiny black SUV I didn't recognize. Jade got out. First, then Michael, then finally Lily, who seemed smaller somehow in the shadow of that enormous vehicle. They walked up the front path like they were approaching a business meeting rather than visiting family. Eleanor, Jade said when I opened the door, her smile too wide, her hug too brief. We need to talk. They sat in my living room, Harold's living room, like visitors rather than family. Michael wouldn't meet my eyes, and Lily seemed unusually quiet, sitting close to her mother instead of running to me the way she always did. The thing is, Jade began, her manicured hands folded in her lap, we've been thinking about your situation here. House is so big, and you're all alone, ... I'm not alone, I said quickly. I have Lily's visits and my friends from church. And ... double quotes. But what if something happened? Michael spoke up, his voice carrying the authority he used at his law office. What if you fell, or had a medical emergency? There would be no one here to help you. I have a phone. I know my neighbors. I've lived in this community for 43 years. Times change, Mom, Michael said. And there was something in the way he said it that made me feel like a child being scolded. You have to be realistic about your limitations. Limitations. The words sat in the air between us like a stone thrown into still water, creating ripples of hurt that spread through my chest. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, though I was beginning to understand with horrible clarity. Well, Jade said, her voice taking on that bright, artificial tone again, we've been looking at some options. There's a lovely assisted living facility about 20 minutes from our house. It's very nice, with activities and meals provided and medical staff on site ... I don't need medical staff, I need my home. But think about it, Jade continued, as if I hadn't spoken. No more worrying about maintenance or cooking or cleaning. And you'd be closer to us, so we could visit more often. Visit, as if I would be living somewhere foreign, somewhere that required visiting rather than simply being. What about Lily? I asked, looking at my granddaughter, who was staring at her hands. Our weekends together. Well, Jade said, glancing at Michael, we've been thinking that might be a bit much for you now. I mean, a 6-year-old is a lot of energy, and at your age. At my age? What? You're just ... You're slowing down, Eleanor. We can all see it, and we want what's best for everyone. I felt something crack inside my chest, a sound like a thread, snapping under too much tension. And what about what I want? You want what's best for Lily, don't you? Jade's voice had gotten harder, more direct. You want her to have consistency, stability, not to have to worry about her grandmother who might forget to pick her up from school, or who might not be able to handle an emergency. I have never forgotten to pick up Lily, not once. Not yet, Michael said quietly. But Mom, you're 72. Things change. There it was again. That word, change. As if growing older was a disease I had contracted, something shameful that needed to be managed and contained. I think, I said, standing up with as much dignity as I could manage, that you should leave now. This is my home, and these are my decisions to make. They left, but not before Jade gave me a look that chilled me to the bone. It was the look of someone who had been patient, but was reaching the end of her tolerance. It was the look of someone who had plans. Lily hugged me goodbye, her small arms clinging to me longer than usual. I love you, Grandma Ellie, she whispered into my ear. I love you so much. I love you too, sweet girl, I whispered back, memorizing the feel of her in my arms, the scent of her hair, the warmth of her small body against mine. I should have known it was a beginning, not an ending. The visits became less frequent after that. Jade would call with excuses. Lily had a play date, or dance lessons, or was feeling under the weather. Michael would echo whatever Jade said, his voice carrying the same false cheer, the same underlying message. We know what's best. When they did visit, it was different. Supervised, somehow. Jade would hover nearby, interrupting our conversations, with reminders about time or activities or things that needed to be done. Lily seemed more subdued, less likely to curl up with me and ask for stories. Grandma Ellie, she whispered to me one day when Jade had gone to the bathroom. Mommy says you might be moving to a new house soon. Is that true? I knelt down to her. Level, looking into those eyes that were so much like Harold's, it made my heart ache. Would you like me to move to a new house? She shook her head vigorously. I like your house. It smells like cookies and fabric softener and ... and love. I don't want you to move. Then I won't. I promised, though even as I said it, I could feel the ground shifting beneath my feet. The pressure continued to build over the following months. Michael would stop by unannounced, always with some concern about the house or my health or my situation. He would walk through the rooms like he was appraising them, making notes on his phone, measuring things with his eyes. The roof needs work, he would say, or this wiring is probably not up to code. Or, Mom, when was the last time you had your eyes checked? Every concern was valid on its surface, but underneath I could hear the real message. You can't take care of this place. You can't take care of yourself. You need us to take care of you, but I wasn't ready to be taken care of. I was ready to live, to continue the life Harold and I had built together, to be the grandmother Lily deserved. I was ready to prove that 72 years of life had made me stronger, not weaker. I was so very wrong about what they were planning. The breaking point came on a warm Saturday in May. Michael had called to say they were having a small family gathering, just a few close friends. Nothing fancy. They wanted me to come to be part of the celebration. What are we celebrating? I asked. Just life, he said. But there was something evasive in his tone. Spring, family, being together. You know, I didn't know, but I agreed to come. I spent the morning making Lily's favorite cookies, snickerdoodles with extra cinnamon. The recipe Harold's mother had taught me when I was a new bride. I put on my best dress, the navy blue one with the pearl buttons that Harold had always said brought out my eyes. I arrived at their house with my plate of cookies and a small gift for Lily, a scarf I had knitted from the softest yarn I could find. In purple, because it was her favorite color. The house was full of people I didn't recognize, all younger than me. All talking in voices that seemed too loud and too bright. Eleanor. Jade swept over to me, her smile brilliant and somehow predatory. "You look lovely. Come, let me introduce you to everyone." She led me through the crowd like I was a museum exhibit, presenting me to her friends with explanations that felt like disclaimers. "This is Michael's mother, Eleanor. She's been living alone since her husband passed. Such a sweet woman. But you know how it is with the elderly, double quotes, the elderly? As if I was a category rather than a person, a problem to be solved rather than a woman with 7 decades of life experience. I found Lily in the corner of the living room, playing with a tablet while the adults socialized around her. She looked up when she saw me, her face lighting up with the same joy that had always made my heart sing. "Grandma Ellie, you came." "Course I came, sweet girl. I brought you something." I gave her the scarf, and she wrapped it around her shoulders immediately, spinning in a circle to make it float around her like wings. "It's beautiful. It's the most beautiful scarf in the whole world. I made it while thinking about you," I told her. "Every stitch was a wish for your happiness." She hugged me then, fierce and tight, and whispered, "I missed you so much. Grandma Ellie, I've been wanting to come see you, but Mommy says, what does Mommy say? That you're too busy or too tired, or that I might be bothering you?" My heart clenched. "Sweet girl, you could never bother me. You are the brightest star in my sky." "Really? Really?" I stayed close to Lily for the rest of the afternoon, helping her with puzzles and listening to her chatter about school and friends and the book she was reading. But I was aware of the conversations happening around us, the way people's voices would drop when they looked in my direction, the way Jade would glance at me with something that looked like calculation. It was getting late, and I was thinking about leaving when I heard my name spoken in the kitchen. I had gone to get a glass of water, and the voices were coming from around the corner, where a group of Jade's friends were gathered near the island. "So what are you going to do about Eleanor?" one of them was asking. "Honestly, I don't know." Jade replied, her voice tired in a way I had never heard before. "She's just not fit to be around the kids anymore. Means she forgets things, names, conversations, where she put things. And honestly, she smells like mothballs and sadness." The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel, cutting through me like a blade. "That's harsh," another voice said, but it was amused rather than reproachful. "It's true, though," Jade continued. "And Michael won't deal with it. He feels guilty about his father's death, like he should have been there more. So now he won't make the hard decisions about his mother." "What kind of decisions?" "Moving her to a facility, taking away her car keys, setting some boundaries with Lily. I mean, the woman fills that child's head with fairy tales and unrealistic expectations. She's teaching her that the world is some magical place where everything works out if you just believe hard enough." "God forbid," someone said sarcastically. "You laugh, but it's not healthy. Lily needs to learn about reality, about responsibility. She needs structure, not some dotty old woman who thinks life is a Disney movie." Dotty old woman. The words hit me like a physical blow, doubling me over with their cruelty. "Plus, Jade continued, Eleanor is sitting on a fortune in that house and all of Harold's investments. We're trying to be respectful, but honestly, we're just waiting for the old lady to go quietly so we can get on with our lives." I gripped the counter, my knees threatening to give out. The room seemed to spin around me, and I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "How much longer do you think you'll have to wait?" someone asked. "Who knows? She's healthy as a horse. Unfortunately, could be years." Unfortunately, I set down my glass with trembling hands and walked out of that house without saying goodbye. To anyone. Not to Michael, who was laughing at something on his phone. Not to Jade, who was still holding court in the kitchen. Not even to Lily, who was absorbed in her tablet and didn't see me leave. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. When I finally made it to my driveway, I sat in Harold's old car and wept deep. Ugly sobs that came from a place I didn't know existed. They thought I was dotty. They thought I smelled like mothballs and sadness. They thought I was an obstacle to be overcome, a problem to be solved. a burden to be endured until I had the grace to die and get out of their way. But worse than all of that, they thought I was unfit to be around my own granddaughter. They thought my love for Lily was somehow harmful, that my stories and imagination and faith in magic were damaging to her development. I stumbled into the house, still wearing my best dress, still carrying the cookies that no one had eaten. I walked through the rooms that had held 43 years of my life, seeing them suddenly through their eyes. The furniture that was old-fashioned rather than classic. The decorations that were cluttered rather than cozy. The photographs that were reminders of the past rather than celebrations of the present. Was this what I had become? A relic? A burden? A dotty old woman who smelled like mothballs and filled children's heads with dangerous dreams. I went to my bedroom, the bedroom I had shared with Harold for so many years, and sat on the edge of the bed. On the nightstand was a photograph of the three of us, Harold, me, and baby Lily, taken just a few days after she was born. I was holding her, and she was so small she fit in my hands like a miracle. Harold was looking at both of us with an expression of pure love, and I was looking at Lily like she was the answer to every prayer I had ever prayed. "What do I do, Harold?" I whispered to the empty room. "What do I do?" But Harold was gone, and I was alone with my broken heart and my shattered dignity and the terrible knowledge that the people I loved most in the world saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in grief and humiliation. But eventually I became aware of a sound, the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. It's the same clock that had measured the moments of our life together. Harold had wound it every Sunday morning for 40 years, and I had continued the tradition after his death. It was a sound that meant home, that meant continuity, that meant the steady passage of time marked by love and routine and the small rituals that make a life worth living. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. I went to Harold's study, a room I had barely entered since his death. Still smelled like his cologne and pipe tobacco, still held the impression of his presence in the chair behind his desk. I opened the file cabinet where he had kept all of our important documents, my hands steady now with purpose. The will was in a manila folder marked estate planning in Harold's careful script. I had signed it years ago, but I had never read it carefully. Harold had handled all of our financial affairs, and I had trusted him completely. But now I spread the pages across his desk and read every word. Most of it was standard. The house would go to Michael, along with Harold's life insurance and retirement savings. There were provisions for Lily's education, set up in a trust that would be managed by Michael and Jade. Everything neat and orderly and designed to provide for the people we loved. But there on page 4 was a clause I had forgotten about. A clause Harold had insisted on including despite my protests at the time, in the event that Eleanor May Holbrook finds herself in a situation where she feels her welfare, dignity, or autonomy is being compromised by the beneficiaries of this will, she shall have the right to revoke any and all provisions and redistribute the estate according to her sole discretion. I read it 3 times, my heart pounding with something that might have been hope. Harold had protected me, even from the grave. He had given me a way out, a way to reclaim my power when I thought I had none left. But there was more. At the bottom of the page, in smaller print, was an addendum I had never seen before. Note: this will supersedes all previous versions. Eleanor May Holbrook retains full legal ownership of all assets until such time as she chooses to transfer them. The original will, filed with the county, grants Eleanor complete authority over the estate for the duration of her lifetime. I stared at the words, reading them over and over until they began to make sense. Harold hadn't just left me the house and a small inheritance. He'd left me everything: the house, the investments, the life insurance, the trust funds. Everything was mine to do with as I saw fit. And if I felt that my welfare, dignity, or autonomy was being compromised, I thought about Jade's words, about the cruel laughter of her friends, about the way Michael looked at me like I was a problem to be solved. I thought about the visits that had become fewer and more supervised. Thought the way they spoke to me like I was a child who couldn't be trusted with her own life. I thought about Lily, okay, and how they were trying to cut me out of her life for her own good. How they wanted to teach her that the world was harsh and unforgiving, that magic was foolish and dreams were dangerous. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for Harold's attorney, Richard Hawthorne. It was evening, but I had his emergency number from when Harold had died. He answered on the third ring. "Richard, it's Eleanor Holbrook. I need to see you first. Thing Monday morning. It's about Harold's will. Of course, Eleanor, is everything all right?" "No," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "But it's about to be." I spent the weekend in a strange state of calm. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, as if preparing for visitors. I organized my sewing room, finishing the projects I had started and putting away the ones I hadn't. I cooked Harold's favorite meals and ate them slowly, savoring each bite. On Sunday, I sat in the garden where Harold had died, surrounded by the roses he had planted for me. I talked to him, telling him about what had happened, about what I was planning to do. The roses nodded in the breeze, and I chose to believe it was his approval. Monday morning arrived, gray and drizzly. The kind of weather that makes the world feel hushed and expectant. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the black one I had worn to Harold's funeral, and drove to Richard's office downtown. Richard Hawthorne was a kind man in his 60s who had handled Harold's legal affairs for 20 years. He had silver hair and gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. And he had always treated me with the respect that Michael and Jade seemed to think I no longer deserved. "Eleanor," he said, rising from his desk when I entered his office. "You look well. Please, sit. Tell me what's troubling you." I sat in the leather chair across from his desk and folded my hands in my lap. "Richard, I need to understand something. About Harold's will. There's a clause about my right to revoke provisions if my welfare is being compromised." "Ah," he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Harold was very specific about that clause. He was concerned about your future, about making sure you would never be. How did he put it? Managed by well-meaning family members. And the addendum about my ownership of the estate. That was Harold's idea as well. He wanted to make sure you would never be dependent on anyone else's generosity, never have to ask permission to live your own life." Richard paused, studying. My face. "Has something happened, Eleanor?" Told him everything. About the pressure to move to assisted living. About the supervised visits with Lily. About the conversation I had overheard at the party. My voice remained steady throughout. Bah! My hands were shaking by the time I finished. Richard was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled in front of him. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. This is exactly what Harold was afraid of. What are my options?" "Legally, you have complete control over the estate. You can revoke Michael's inheritance, dissolve the trust, redistribute everything according to your wishes. The question is, what do you want to do?" I had thought about this all weekend, lying awake. In the bed I had shared with Harold, staring at the ceiling and weighing my options. I could fight them, make a scene, demand my rights. I could threaten to cut them off financially unless they treated me with respect. But that wasn't who I was. I wasn't interested in revenge or manipulation or using money as a weapon. I was interested in dignity, in peace, in the right to live my own life on my own terms. "I want to set up a separate trust for Lily's education," I said. "One that Michael and Jade can't touch. I want to make sure she'll always have the resources to pursue her dreams, whatever they might be. Of course, what about the rest? To donate it, all of it, to organizations that help elderly people who are being mistreated or neglected. I want to make sure other grandmothers don't have to choose between their dignity and their family." Richard smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen in months. "Harold would be proud of you, Eleanor. He always said you were the strongest person he knew." We spent the next 2 hours going over the details. Richard explained that the process would take a few weeks, that there would be paperwork to file and legal procedures to follow. But by the end of the month, the entire estate would be restructured according to my wishes. "There's one more thing," I said as we prepared to leave. "I don't want them to know about this until it's final. I want to have some peace before the storm, of course. The new will won't be filed until everything is complete." I left Richard's office feeling lighter than I had in months. The sun had come out while we were talking, and the world seemed brighter, more hopeful. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through the park where Harold and I used to walk. Past the school where I had picked up Lily so many times, the house welcomed me back like an old friend. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in Harold's chair, looking out at the garden. The roses were in full bloom, red and pink and yellow, nodding in the breeze like they were sharing secrets. I had 3 weeks of peace before the storm arrived. During those weeks, I lived like a woman who had been given a gift. I woke up each morning grateful for the silence, for the solitude, for the freedom to move through my own house without feeling like I was being watched or judged. I sewed curtains for the kitchen window, bright yellow ones that caught the morning light and made the whole room feel like sunshine. I planted new flowers in the garden, not because they were practical, but because they were beautiful. I wrote letters to old friends, people I had lost touch with over the years. I called my sister in California, and we talked for hours about our childhood, about our parents, about the way the world had changed since we were young. I felt like I was reclaiming parts of myself that had been lost, gathering up the threads of my life and weaving them into something new. I also made peace with the knowledge that my relationship with Michael and Jade would never be the same. They had shown me who they really were, and I had to accept that. But I mourned the loss of the son I thought I had raised, the one who would have defended me instead of allowing me to be diminished. Most of all, I mourned the loss of Lily. I knew that what I was doing would likely mean the end of our relationship, at least for now. But I also knew that the alternative, watching them slowly erase me from her life while pretending it was for her own good, was worse. I wrote her a letter, even though I knew she was too young to read it. I told her about the princess dress, about the stories I had told her, about the way her laughter had saved me after Harold died. I told her that sometimes the people who love us most have to make difficult choices, and that those choices might not make sense until she was older. I sealed the letter in an envelope and put it in my jewelry box, next to the pearls Harold had given me for our 25th anniversary. Someday, when she was old enough to understand, I would give it to her. Or maybe she would find it after I was gone, and she would finally know how much she had meant to me. The call came on a Tuesday morning in June. I was watering the roses when the phone rang. Okay? And something in the shrill sound made my heart skip. I almost didn't answer it, but some instinct told me this was the moment I had been waiting for. "Mom?" Michael's voice was strained, confused. "I'm at the bank. There's been some kind of mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "They're saying I don't have access to Dad's accounts anymore. They're saying the trust for Lily's education has been dissolved. They're saying ... double quotes." His voice cracked. "They're saying you've changed the will." I set down my watering can and sat on the garden bench Harold had built for me 30 years ago. "There's no mistake, Michael." "What do you mean?" I've taken control of my own life, something I should have done months ago." There was a long silence. Then, "Mom, what have you done?" "Exercised my legal right to manage my own estate. The right your father gave me because he knew there might come a time when I'd need to protect myself." "Protect yourself from what?" "From us. Mom, we're your family. We're trying to help you. Help me." I stood up, feeling strength flowing through my body like electricity. "Is that what you call it when your wife tells her friends that I'm unfit to be around children? When she says I smell like mothballs and sadness? When she says you're all just waiting for me to die so you can get on with your lives?" Another silence, longer this time. "Mom, I don't know what you think you heard, but I know exactly what I heard, Michael. Standing in your kitchen, getting a glass of water when your wife and her friends were discussing my shortcomings. Apparently, I'm a dotty old woman who's unfortunately healthy and might live for years. Jade didn't mean Jade meant exactly what she said. And so did you when you sat there and let her say it. When you've spent months trying to convince me that I'm too old, too frail, too forgetful to live in my own home or spend time with my own granddaughter. We were worried about you. No, Michael, you were worried about yourselves, about having to deal with an elderly relative who might become inconvenient, about having to wait for your inheritance. I paused, letting the words sink in. Well, you don't have to worry about that anymore. What do you mean? I mean, there is no inheritance. Not for you. Not for Jade. I've donated everything to organizations that help elderly people who are being mistreated by their families. The only thing I've kept is a trust for Lily's education, one that you can't touch. One that will be managed by the bank until she's old enough to use it. The sound he made was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Mom, you can't do this. Money was meant for our future, for Lily's future. Lily's future is secure. As for yours, I suggest you figure it out the same way Harold and I did, by working for it. But the house is mine, was always mine, will be mine until the day I die. And after that, it goes to charity too. Mom, please, we can work this out. We can talk about this. There's nothing to work out, Michael. You've made your feelings about me very clear. I'm simply responding accordingly. I could hear him crying now, and part of me wanted to comfort him the way I had when he was a little boy with scraped knees and broken toys. But that little boy had grown into a man who stood by while his wife mocked his mother, who thought love was something that could be managed and controlled and parceled out according to convenience. Can I see you? He asked. Can we please just talk about this face to face? I don't think that's a good idea. Mom, please, I'm sorry. So sorry. I didn't know what Jade was saying to her friends. I didn't know you heard. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. You didn't want to see what was happening because it was easier to let her handle the Eleanor problem, so you didn't have to feel guilty about it. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Was it fair when you started treating me like I was incompetent? Was it fair when you began limiting my time with Lily? Was it fair when you made me feel like I was a burden on the people I love most? We never meant to make you feel that way. Intent doesn't matter, Michael. Impact does. And the impact of your actions has been to make me feel worthless and unwanted in my own family. You're not worthless. You're not unwanted. You're my mother, and I love you. And you have a funny way of showing it. We talked for another few minutes, but there was nothing left to say. Michael begged and pleaded and promised things would be different, but I knew better. People don't change unless they're forced to, and sometimes not even then. When I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, but peace. The kind of peace that comes from finally standing up for yourself. From finally saying enough to people who have been taking advantage of your kindness. The phone rang again an hour later. This time it was Jade, her voice shaking with rage. Could you do this to us? She demanded without preamble. How could you be so selfish? Selfish. I almost laughed. I'm selfish for managing my own money. You're selfish for destroying your son's future out of spite? Spite had nothing to do with it. This is about dignity, about respect, about the right to live my own life without being made to feel like a problem that needs to be solved. We were trying to help you. You were trying to control me. There's a difference. You're being ridiculous. You're acting like a spoiled child who didn't get her way. I'm acting like a woman who overheard her daughter-in-law tell a room full of people that she's unfit to be around children and smells like mothballs and sadness. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I was venting, Jade said. Finally, I was having a bad day and I said things I didn't mean. You said I was teaching Lily that the world was a magical place where everything works out if you just believe hard enough. You said that wasn't healthy, that she needed to learn about reality instead of listening to some dotty old woman. I didn't mean you meant every word, and you know what? You're right about one thing. I do believe in magic. I believe in the magic of kindness, of storytelling, of making people feel loved and valued. I believe that the world is a better place when we fill it with wonder instead of cynicism. That's not realistic. Maybe not. But it's what I choose to believe. And it's what I was trying to teach Lily, that she is valuable, that she is loved, that she deserves to dream big dreams and believe in beautiful things. She needs to learn to be practical. She needs to learn to be human. And part of being human is believing in something bigger than yourself, something worth fighting for. Like what? Like the right to be treated with dignity. Like the right to be loved for who you are, not managed for who you might become. Like the right to take up space in this world without apologizing for it. You're being dramatic. I'm being honest. For the first time in months, I'm being completely honest about how you've made me feel. Jade was quiet for a long moment. She spoke again. Her voice was different, smaller, more uncertain. What about Lily? You're punishing her for something that has nothing to do with her. I'm not punishing Lily. I'm protecting her. Kesu Education is fully funded, more than it ever was before. She'll never have to worry about money for college or graduate school or whatever dreams she chooses to pursue. But you're not going to see her anymore. That's up to you. If you want to use her as a weapon, if you want to keep her away from me to punish me for standing up for myself, that's your choice. But I won't be manipulated by threats about my granddaughter. We're not threatening. Yes, you are. You're trying to make me feel guilty for reclaiming my own life. You're trying to make me believe that wanting to be treated with respect is somehow selfish or wrong. I don't know what you want from us. I want you to see me as a person instead of a problem. I want you to value my relationship with Lily instead of treating it like a liability. I want you to understand that being old doesn't make me stupid, or incompetent, or unworthy of love, okay? We never said you were unworthy of love. You didn't have to say it, okay? You showed me with every supervised visit, every concerned conversation about my limitations. Every decision you made about my life without consulting me. What if we ... What if we try to do better? What if we give you more time with Lily, more say in decisions? Would you consider changing the will back? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the question. Part of me wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that they could change, that we could find a way back to being a family. But I had learned something important in these past weeks. Respect given out of fear is not the same as respect given out of love, and I deserved better than to be tolerated because I held the purse strings. I'm sorry, Jade, but no, please. My decision is final. The will has been changed. The papers have been filed. The only thing left to decide is what kind of relationship we're going to have going forward. What kind of relationship can we have after this? That depends on you. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not hiding. I'm going to keep living in this house, taking care of this garden, being the same person I've always been. If you want to be part of my life, you know where to find me. And if we don't, then I'll be sad. But I'll survive. I've survived worse things than being alone. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in Harold's chair for a long time after that call, watching the light change in the garden. The roses were at their peak now, full and fragrant and gloriously alive. Harold would have been proud of them, I thought. It would have been proud of me, too, for finally standing up for myself, for refusing to be diminished. The hardest part was not knowing what would happen with Lily. I had meant what I said to Jade. I wouldn't be manipulated by threats about my granddaughter. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt to think about losing her, about missing her growing up, about not being there to tell her stories and teach her about the magic in everyday things. I tried to prepare myself for the possibility that I might not see her again, at least not for a long time. But I also held on to the hope that love is stronger than pride, that eventually the people who matter most find their way back to each other. 3 days later, I got my answer. I was in the garden, deadheading roses, when I heard a car in the driveway. I looked up to see Harold's old sedan, the one Michael had been driving since I rarely used it anymore. My heart started beating faster as I watched the doors open. Michael got out first, his face drawn and tired. Then Jade, looking uncomfortable and uncertain. And finally, Lily, who stood by the car for a moment before breaking into a run toward me. Grandma Ellie. I caught her in my arms, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around the way I used to when she was smaller. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and sunshine, and her laughter was like music in my ears. "I missed you so much," she said, her face buried in my neck. "Mommy said you were sad, and I wanted to come make you feel better. You already have, sweet girl. You already have." I set her down but kept holding her hand as Michael and Jade approached. They looked like they were walking to their own execution, and I felt a pang of sympathy for them despite everything that had happened. "Mom," Michael said, stopping a few feet away. "We came to apologize. And to ask if we can start over," Jade added, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at them for a long moment. These two people who had caused me so much pain, but who were also the parents of the child I loved more than life itself. They looked genuinely sorry, genuinely ashamed of what they had done. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally, "but I meant what I said. The will isn't changing back." "We know," Michael said quickly. "We're not here about the money. We're here because we realized we've been terrible to you, and we want to make it right." "How?" "By treating you the way you deserve to be treated," Jade said. "By respecting your relationship with Lily. By remembering that you're not just Michael's mother, you're a person with your own thoughts and feelings and rights. And by letting you live your own life," Michael added. "In your own house, on your own terms." I felt something inside my chest begin to unknot, just a little. "And what about Lily?" "She wants to spend time with you," Jade said. "She's been asking about you constantly. She misses your stories, your sewing lessons, your cookies. I miss her too. Then maybe we could work something out. Not because we're trying to get back into your good graces, but because it's what's best for Lily." I looked down at my granddaughter, who was still holding my hand and looking up at me with those eyes that were so much like Harold's. "What do you think, sweet girl? Would you like to come visit me sometimes?" "Every day," she said immediately. "I want to come every day and help you sew, and hear stories about the princess dress." I laughed, the first genuine laugh I had felt in months. "How about we start with weekends and see how it goes? Okay, can we make cookies? Can we plant flowers? Can we sit in the garden and you can tell me about Grandpa Harold? We can do all of those things." Michael and Jade stayed for about an hour, awkward but trying. We didn't talk about the money or the will or the cruel things that had been said. We talked about Lily, about the weather, about the roses that were blooming so beautifully this year. When they left, Jade hugged me briefly, stiffly, but genuinely. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for what I said. I forgive you." I said and meant it. "But I won't forget. I understand." Michael hugged me too, and I could feel him crying. "I love you, Mom. I'm sorry I forgot how to show it." "I love you too, son. We'll figure this out." After they left, I sat in the garden with the last of the evening light painting everything golden. I thought about Harold, about how proud he would be of the way I had stood up for myself. I thought about the money I had donated and how it would help other elderly people who were being mistreated or neglected. I thought about Lily and how she would grow up knowing that her grandmother was a woman who fought for her dignity and but mostly I thought about the future. For the first time in months, I had a future that belonged to me. A future where I could live in my own house, tend my own garden, tell my own stories. A future where I could be Lily's grandmother without permission, without supervision, without apology. The roses nodded in the breeze. And I chose to believe it was Harold's approval. 2 years have passed since that day, and I want to tell you how the story ends, or rather how it continues. Because the best stories don't really end. They just change shape. I still live in the house on Maple Street, surrounded by Harold's roses and my own memories. The assisted living facility Michael and Jade had chosen for me is now a distant memory. Future that was planned for me but never became mine. Lily visits me every weekend just as she did before, but now it's different. Better. There's no tension in the air, no sense that our time together is being monitored or rationed. She comes on Friday afternoon and stays until Sunday evening. And we fill those hours with all the magic two people can create together. I've taught her to sew, and she's surprisingly good at it. Her stitches are still uneven, but her enthusiasm is perfect. She makes clothes for her dolls and curtains for her room. And last month, she made a quilt square that said, "I love Grandma Ellie," in crooked letters that are more beautiful than anything I've ever sewn. We still tell stories about the princess dress, but now Lily adds her own chapters. The princess has learned to be brave, she tells me. And she's not afraid to stand up for herself when people try to make her feel small. The princess knows that the most beautiful things in the world are the ones you create with your own hands and your own heart. I've received letters from some of the organizations I donated to, telling me how the money is being used. There's a legal aid fund for elderly people who are being financially abused by their families. There's a program that provides companionship for seniors who have been isolated or abandoned. There's a foundation that builds affordable housing for older adults who want to live independently but need some support. Every letter makes me think of Harold, how he would have loved knowing that our life savings were being used to help people maintain their dignity in their final years. Every letter reminds me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is give away your power to someone who needs it more. Michael and Jade have been true to their word. They visit regularly, but not intrusively. They ask about my health and my needs, but they don't assume they know what's best for me. They've learned to see me as a person rather than a problem. And while our relationship will never be what it was, it's becoming something new, something built on mutual respect. Rather than duty and guilt, last month Jade surprised me by asking if I would teach her to sew. She wants to make Halloween costumes for Lily, she said, and she thought it would be nice to learn a skill that could become a tradition between them. "I never had a grandmother who taught me things like that," she explained. "I always envied Lily for having you." We spent an afternoon together at my sewing machine, her hands awkward but eager as I guided her through the basics. It was a small moment, but it felt like a bridge being built between us, stitch by careful stitch. The hardest part of these past 2 years has been the loneliness, not the solitude. I've always been comfortable with my own company, but the loneliness of knowing that there are people in the world who see aging as a disease, who think that growing old means giving up your right to live on your own terms. I've started volunteering at the senior center downtown, leading a sewing circle for women my age. We make quilts for the homeless shelter and blankets for the animal rescue. And sometimes we just sit and stitch and talk about our lives. Many of them have stories similar to mine. Children who mean well but don't understand. Families who love them but want to manage them. A world that seems to have no place for elderly women who refuse to be invisible. The thing is, my friend Margaret said last week as we worked on a quilt together, they act like being old is something that happened to us instead of something we achieved. Like we should be ashamed of having lived long enough to accumulate wisdom and experience and stories. "They're afraid," said another woman, Dorothy. "They're afraid of their own aging, so they try to control ours." "Or they're impatient," added Ruth. "They want their inheritance, their freedom from responsibility, their chance to live their lives without having to worry about elderly parents." I nodded, understanding. I had been all of those things once, afraid, impatient, convinced that I knew what was best for everyone. But age had taught me that wisdom isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about knowing which questions too. The question I had learned to ask was not, how can I make everyone happy? But how can I honor my own life while still loving the people who matter to me? The answer, I discovered, was by setting boundaries. By refusing to be diminished. By understanding that love without respect is not really love at all. But this story isn't really about money or wills or even family drama. It's about something much more fundamental. The right to exist as a full person regardless of your age. It's about the revolutionary act of refusing to disappear just because the world has decided you're no longer useful. Every morning, I wake up in the bed I shared with Harold for 40 years in the house we built together. surrounded by the things we chose and the memories we created. I make coffee for one now, but I drink it from the cup Harold gave me for our 10th anniversary. And I can still feel his presence in the steam that rises from the surface. I spend my days doing things that bring me joy. I sew curtains for the windows and dresses for Lily and quilts for people I'll never meet. I tend a garden Harold planted, adding new flowers each season and talking to him about how they're growing. I read books that make me think and movies that make me cry and letters from old friends who remember when we were young. But most importantly, spend my days being myself. It's not the version of myself that other people think I should be, but the real me. The me who loves fairy tales and believes in magic. The me who thinks that dignity is more important than comfort and that respect is more valuable than money. The me who knows that growing old is not a failure but an accomplishment. Lily understands this, I think. She sees me not as a burden or a problem, but as a person with stories to tell and love to give. When she looks at me, she doesn't see limitations or decline. She sees possibility and wonder and the kind of love that doesn't change just because your hair turns gray or your hands get spotted with age. Grandma Ellie, she said to me last weekend as we worked on a new quilt together. I hope I'm just like you when I get old. What do you mean, sweet girl? I hope I'm brave. I hope I stand up for myself. I hope I never let anyone make me feel small. I looked at her, this beautiful child who was growing up in a world that would try to diminish her in 1,000 different ways. And I felt a fierce protectiveness rise in my chest. You're already brave, I told her. You're already strong. Yeah. Just have to remember that about yourself when the world tries to make you forget. Will you remind me? As long as I'm able to? And even after that, if you listen closely enough, you'll hear my voice in your heart telling you that you are worthy of love. Worthy of respect, worthy of taking up space in this world. She nodded solemnly as if she understood the weight of what I was saying, and maybe she did. Children are often wiser than we give them credit for. So this is how my story ends, not with revenge, not with bitterness, not with the cold satisfaction of having won a battle. It ends with understanding, with forgiveness, with a quiet knowledge that standing up for yourself is not about punishing others, but about honoring yourself. I think about Harold every day, and I know he would be proud of the way I handled this situation. Not because I was clever or strategic, but because I was true to the woman he fell in love with all those years ago. The woman who believed in magic and dignity, and the power of love to transform even the most broken relationships. The money I donated continues to help people. And that gives me more satisfaction than any revenge could have. The letters I receive from elderly people who have been helped by the foundation tell me that my pain has been transformed into something useful, something healing. My relationship with Michael and Jade continues to evolve. We're not the same as we were before. We can't be, because we've all learned too much about each other. But we're building something new, something based on honesty rather than assumption, on respect rather than duty. And Lily continues to grow, to learn, to become the remarkable young woman I always knew she could be. She's 8 now, and she's already showing signs of the strength and independence that will serve her well in life. She knows that her grandmother is a woman who fought for her dignity and won. And I hope that knowledge will help her fight for her own when the time comes. The house on Maple Street is still my sanctuary. But it's no longer a place where I'm hiding from the world. It's a place where I'm fully, completely, unapologetically myself. Where I can be 74 years old and still believe in fairy tales. Where I can miss my husband and still find joy in daily life. Where I can love my family and still set boundaries with them. The roses in the garden are blooming again this year, more beautiful than ever. I like to think Harold is helping them grow. That somewhere in the space between earth and sky, he's still tending the things he loved. I like to think he's proud of the woman I've become in his absence. Not bitter or broken, but stronger and more certain of my own worth. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in the garden in the evening light, I feel his presence so strongly it takes my breath away. I feel his approval, his love, his quiet pride in the way I've handled this difficult chapter of my life. "You did good, Ellie." I imagine him saying, his voice warm with affection, "You did real good." And for the first time in a long time, I believe him. This is what I want you to understand, dear ones who are listening to this story. Growing old is not a defeat. It's a victory. Every year we survive, every challenge we overcome, every moment of joy we create despite the losses we've endured. These are not consolation prizes. These are triumphs. The world will try to tell you otherwise. It will try to convince you that your best days are behind you, that your worth diminishes with your youth, that your voice matters less as your body grows frailer. But the world is wrong. Your worth is not determined by your age, your productivity, or your convenience to others. Your worth is determined by your humanity, your capacity for love, your ability to touch other lives with kindness and wisdom and grace. Don't let anyone, not even the people who love you, convince you that you need to make yourself smaller to make them more comfortable. Don't let anyone manage your life, your choices, your dignity in the name of what's best for you. Stand up for yourself. Set boundaries. Refuse to be diminished. Love the people who matter to you, but don't sacrifice your self-respect for their approval. And remember that every day you wake up is a gift, not just to yourself, but to the world. Every story you tell, every act of kindness you perform, every moment of beauty you create adds something irreplaceable to the human experience. You are not a burden. You are not a problem to be solved. You are a person with decades of experience, wisdom, and love to offer. You are a keeper of stories, a weaver of connections, a guardian of traditions and values that the world needs now more than ever. Don't let anyone make you forget that. Don't let anyone make you invisible. Take up space. Make noise. Demand respect. Love fiercely. Live fully. And if anyone tries to tell you that you're too old, too difficult, too much trouble, tell them about Eleanor May, who at 72 years old learned that the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to disappear. Tell them about the woman who chose dignity over comfort, respect over money, and self-worth over family approval. Tell them about the grandmother who taught her granddaughter that magic is real, that love is worth fighting for, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up for yourself. Tell them that some threads once woven can never be unraveled, and some stories once told can never be forgotten.